John is a high school math teacher from Qatar, and we're bringing him back because John was with us back on episode 185, where we talked about shifting his pedagogical practice. We talked about standards-based grading, gave him some next steps in that and on how to change some of his practice. And he's back 1 year later to the day to kind of fill us in on what's happening over the year. And you're going to want to stick around because he's got some mind-blowing nuggets to share with you about so much change over the last year, specifically on his assessment practices in his geometry course.
Exactly. And the beauty is here, we reached out, we wanted to check in and see how things were going, but really had no idea where the conversation was going to go. We didn't really know, if he continued down that same path, if he made any progress. And John was so kind to pick a time to hop on with us. And as you're going to find out here, he's continued that learning journey. And it sounds like a lot of ideas that we were discussing on this last episode, or the first episode we had him on, has really evolved into shifting his assessment process in his classroom. And the beauty is that it's actually making a massive impact on student outcomes and just the overall trajectory in his math classroom. So, hey, friends, this is a Math Moment Maker reflection episode where we talk with members like you from our community who are working hard to continue reflecting and refining their practice to make math moments with more students in their math classrooms. So hang on, buckle up, and let's go. Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr. We are from MakeMathMoments.com.
This is the only podcast that coaches you through a 6-step plan to grow your mathematics program, whether at the classroom level or at the district level.
And we do that by helping you cultivate and foster your mathematics program like a strong, healthy, and balanced tree.
The trunk represents leadership in your organization or the classroom pillars in your math class, while the roots of the tree represent mathematics content knowledge and what it means to be mathematically proficient.
Like a tree requires soil, water, and sunlight, your mathematics program requires a productive educator mindset and the belief that all students can achieve at all levels. Your professional learning structure or your professional learning plan represents the limbs of the tree.
The branches of the tree represent the development of educator pedagogical content knowledge, including effective teaching and equity-based teaching practices. And the final section are the leaves, which represent the resources, the tools, and classroom environment.
If you master the 6 parts of an effective mathematics program, the impact of your math program will grow and reach far and wide.
Every week, you'll get the insight you need to stop feeling overwhelmed, gain back your confidence, and get back to enjoying the planning and facilitating of your mathematics program for the students or educators that you serve. All right, friends, let's dig into that conversation with John.
Hey there, John. Hey, thanks for coming back. It's been a while. I think actually we didn't say this before we hit record, but it's actually 1 year to the day.
Is it really the actual day?
I have a note here in our notes where we take notes, and we usually put the date of the call, and it's exactly a year ago today that we chatted with you, John. And I know that
is insanity.
I know.
I didn't even.
I know it's such a kind of a weird coincidence there. We chatted with John back on episode 185. If you have not yet listened to that, go do that. Do yourself a favor, because this is a Where Are They Now type episode. We're going to talk with John, get the lowdown on what's going on with him. But back in that episode, John, we were chatting about pedagogical moves, focusing on assessment. And I know you're teaching at an American school in Qatar. So, hey, fill us in on the last year and tell us what's going on with you lately.
So yeah, hey, thanks again for having me back on. This last year has been really interesting. I don't know if you guys knew everywhere else, but the World Cup happened this year, right in our neighborhood.
Right, yes, in
And
Qatar.
so just when we get out of COVID, and stop with the the hybrid school and everything. We have this big World Cup right in the middle of our year. So we still haven't had a normal school year yet.
Oh,
In the
geez.
4 years I've been at this school. But the World Cup was awesome. It was really interesting to be in a tiny country with the World Cup going on. Um, it
How
was
cool is that?
a bit disruptive for school, but we'll take it. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Um, but anyway, I wanted to talk to you guys again because of how much your assessment course has changed the way I teach my geometry class.
Oh.
Um,
Awesome.
yeah, like
Tell us more
Yeah,
about
tell.
that, because to be honest, we actually were reaching out to you and a handful of others and saying, "Hey, listen, we want to check in. We want to see how things are going," but we actually didn't say, "Give us a heads up as to what's going on." So that's
Yeah,
like
so
music to our ears here. Tell us more.
well, yeah, let's kind of dig on that because the last time we did chat about assessment and standards-based grading, and I think we tossed the assessment course, which is built into the academy, your way. So, kind of, why don't we rewind and take us back to that moment where you started that course and some of the first things you did and what's changed in your room.
right. Okay, so geometry in the American curriculum is not like the it's not on the top of every math teacher's list to teach. It's kind of the um the class that I feel like most of us were really good at algebra when we were coming up. And then in the American curriculum, we have this whole separate class for geometry, which no one thinks is a good idea, but is sort of a relic of how we've been doing things for 100 years. And it ends up being sort of shunted to the new teacher or the inexperienced teacher or whatever. It's not a class that people are scrambling to get to teach.
Mhm.
So as someone who like sort of moves around pretty frequently, I've ended up with geometry for probably the last 6 years of my career. Um, and so I've sort of just leaned into it, and I've been working pretty hard on the course. Um, I started at this school like 4 years ago with the geometry class. I talked to the team and we switched it to a new curriculum with the illustrative math
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we base our course on that. And we've been trying to make it less like the traditional, like super skills based and super proofs based
Mhm.
geometry courses of the past, and make it a little more authentic, like we have been talking about last time. Um, so it's not even close to a place where the course feels like good or like it's fixed yet, but we've been working on it. And I've been working actually with one teacher for all of those 4 years. Um, Mo Hyder, here's a shout out to you. Um, and we've been trying to do new things and trying to like revamp the course. And then this year, a couple of different professional experiences coalesced to really sort of shake things up in the way we did things. The first one was at the beginning of the year. I was lucky enough to get sent to a conference with Dr. Anthony Mohammed in where was it? In Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And that was a conference around the PLC structure, and how working in teams with like focused collaboration, um, and uh, following this sort of the four questions of the PLC structure can really change the way you do things. And so those questions are like, what do we want students to be able to do? How do we know that they can do it? What do we do if they can't? And what do we do if they can already do it? So it's like starting with what do we want students to be able to do and being really intentional about making sure that that happens, basically. Um, but he had this really inspiring story of a school that he turned around from like a failing school to one of the top schools in the US. And part of that was really focusing on skills and assessment in the math area of it. So they had things like they called it a homework lunch. If you didn't get your homework done, you had lunch with a tutor, and you you did that until it was done. We've seen like lots of different iterations of that. They also had uh, like scheduled assessments per subject area. So like they knew at the beginning of the year when math was going to give all of its summative assessments,
Mm.
and that was the only
Hmm.
time you could give them. So there was only like a couple of a semester or something.
Okay.
And then they had the idea, and this like really resonated with me that we cannot accept, if we are teaching students, we can't accept the idea that they would leave our classes without knowing how to do these things that we
Mm.
have said
Hmm.
are essential for this class. And so that started sort of rumbling around in my head, excuse me. Um and I started with that idea of what are the things that are these essential skills for geometry? Like what are the things that I want my students to walk out of here, or I don't want my students to walk out of here without having shown me that they're able to do them. And so during that World Cup time, we had a little bit of extra time around the school, so we got together for lunch. We like went down to half days or something. I forget exactly what the schedule was, but um, we got together for lunch, the three of the geometry teachers, and we came up with this for the second semester of the year. Like, what are the essential skills? We went through our standards, and then what we did was we tied them to Delta Math activities. Um, the idea was that skills are something, or the idea that was starting to form was that skills are something that we can assess with technology. And with Delta Math, we can just, the beautiful thing about Delta Math is the way that it can just make more and more problems of the same type,
Hmm. Yep.
um, keep them being different. So we could keep students going on that, and have them come back to it and practice and retake them, retake assessments. So we were sort of starting to think about the idea that the skills part of the class we could totally sort of shunt to Delta Math. Like the teaching, we would do the teaching, but we don't have to waste our time coming up with assessments of skills
Mm.
because there's a computer program that can do that really well. So that's where we sort of started in December with our planning and with that PLC notion of we don't want kids leaving geometry class without being able to do these things. And so we had a big list of semester two essential skills. And then it was time for the winter break. And it was a long one because of the World Cup. And I had been your assessment course had been sort of bookmarked. And I was at this point where like I had an idea, like a kernel of an idea that I was thinking about implementing. It didn't feel quite right yet. And I wanted some more input about assessment. So I know that assessment is kind of the key to how things happen in a math class. So that was seemed like a good time. So on the beach in Thailand,
Now you're making
uh,
everyone jealous.
I was just gonna say, I'm like, I want to know how many people there's been a lot of teachers through that course. How many people did it on a beach?
Yeah.
right. Well, it's a nice kind of learning environment. I will say
For
that.
sure. Right.
But it was pretty nice. I had some space from the day to day of school, and I was able to sort of sit back and after I convinced my wife that I wasn't doing it because I had to, I was doing it because I wanted to. I'm on vacation. This is something I want to do. Um, I got through it, and it was just like a series of light bulb moments and a series of, oh yeah, I can do that. And the biggest thing was probably the idea of growth days and the sort of um
Hmm.
less lengthy and more frequent assessment. Um
What specifically, when you say the biggest idea of the growth days, like give us a snapshot on like what specifically was it about the idea of the growth days that kind of resonated with you so much?
the idea of students having a a time set aside to uh think about what to do to get better for themselves. We kind of ended up we kind of ended up like when we presented this idea to everybody, we split this um we presented the need for a change in terms of three problems. One of the problems was that students were getting through geometry class without knowing how to do some basic skills. Like they were passing the class like at a very low level, but we wanted to see if we could make it so that even at that low level, we could have some understanding that they had been able to do some basic skills at some point. Um, Number two, we wanted to like clean up problem solving and reasoning, and make that um, more reasonable for students to get better at. And number three, we really were noticing the lack of ownership um, that was going on in the classroom, the lack of ownership of students for their own learning. And so one of the things that really spoke to me about the growth days was that, hey, here's a time for students to choose what to work on. There's obviously going to be some that we tell them they need to do, but there's also a chance for them to think about where they are and what they need to do to improve. Also, the that was one of the things, and the other thing was the idea of the shorter time period between
Mm-hmm.
these assessments, um, because the the standard idea that you talk about and that everybody does is like you know teach like six, seven, 8 lessons, quiz that looks
Mm-hmm.
exactly like the test,
Mm-hmm.
2 review days or something, and then the test. And that quiz was such a waste of time. It was just a whole class period of a formative assessment that the kids know doesn't count for a grade, and so they don't take very seriously, and they just use it as practice, as like I'm gonna wait till that quiz, study that quiz, and then I know the test is gonna be just like it in 2 days.
Mhm.
So that cycle was really just feeling kind of awful, and I was searching for a way to get out of that.
Hmm.
And the structure of 2 lessons assess, 2 lessons assess, and really breaking the skills down into smaller chunks, getting out of the unit mindset and getting into like, oh, here's like one set of things that are really closely related that don't take 4 weeks to teach.
Mhm.
It takes 2 days to teach this, right? Um, so those were the things that really spoke to me about the idea of growth days.
How
I
did
love it.
how did the students respond? Like sometimes when you change things, some students take it well, some students don't. But also thinking about the
Yeah, like
students
there
when
was
they
no review day for this
took
assessment,
well,
Yeah.
right?
well, like yeah, like there's like you were saying that you were feeling that students weren't owning, the learning and owning what um, their achievement in class. How did that change when the growth days came in?
Well, so I heard an episode of yours like last year. What was her name? I think Anna Clark, maybe, about how uh difficult it is to fit standards-based grading into a power school grade book.
Mm.
Hmm. Hmm.
It was I have her name written down somewhere. But anyway, I that's what the big deal was, right? It was a big deal what we called things. It was a big deal how we put things in the grade book. And yeah, students had a lot of trouble um adjusting.
Mm.
Now, that's that's super understandable. And like we changed things in the middle of the year on them, and we changed them in a pretty significant way. It's not ideal, but like really when I took the course and like started putting this stuff together, it wasn't something that I could wait until
Mm,
next year to do. I had to do it.
Totally.
Um, and we were able to convince most students that this was something that was advantageous to them. And when they actually believed us, when when they because like retaking assessments was not a thing that is um it's not a thing that's sort of allowed in our assessment policy. Like the big summative assessments, you do not get a resit of those. Um and so I don't think they really believed that I was serious about that when we started. But once they started seeing, hey, whoa, he's serious. He's gonna make us take this again until we get it perfect. Um, then they started buying into it for the most part. We had a few that were just really resistant to it,
Hmm.
and a few parents that were super resistant to it. Um, but that's going to happen with change. And we were sort of ready for that, and we sort of stuck together as a team really well. We couldn't have done this without the buy-in from the team. The other two teachers, one was Mo Hyder, who I mentioned earlier, and Stacy Fleming. Really just like when I came back from break, all jazzed and told them about this. I was like, please, 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 guys, you got to do this. We got to do this. And they were like, okay, sure. And so we really worked closely together, and it wouldn't have worked if we hadn't. We have 7 sections of this course to keep online, and we had some really difficult situations with students and parents to deal with, but we stuck together and got through it, and it
I
worked
love it.
really well. Yeah, and
I
I think we no, go ahead.
I was just going to comment and say, I wanted to go back to even just some of the challenges that students have because there are big changes, and then I want to, give you a little bit of, credit where credit is due that you were in the middle of a year and you were probably still trying to make sense. It's like you had, it sounds like this epiphany through the course and through the work that you had been doing. And you're like, I know that we want to do this, but oftentimes when we go to implement, there's, things come up that you don't anticipate, right? So now you have to think on your toes a little bit. So just the fact that you and your team were able and willing to do that work. And like you said, I think because all of you were doing it, it makes it so much better because then you have a little PLC where you go, hey, like a student said this to me today, you might have been second guessing, and then somebody else on your team can then sort of pick you up, right? Or say, hey, here's how I was thinking, or oh, maybe we need to, connect tonight and chat about it and try to figure this out. But ultimately, keeping that team together, I think, is really, really important. Now, can I ask you, in terms of the amount of time that you've put in, there's teachers who are listening. So first of all, folks who listen to the podcast are doing amazing things. They're, finding an hour a week to listen to the podcast. That's so awesome. What did it look like and sound like for you when you were doing the course? So it sounds like you were on vacation, but it was because you wanted to do it. So good on
Mhm.
you. But what sort of, like how did you chunk up the course in such a way that you were like, did you binge it? Or were you like, hey, I'm going to commit to, sometimes we tell teachers, hey, commit like 15 minutes a day. And it's like, if you can commit that 15 minutes, that can, take you through over, X number of days, weeks, or months. So what did that look like and sound like for you? Because, if I'm at home right now and they're going like, wow, this sounds interesting to me, but, like, how much time and effort is this going to take in order for me to be able to sort of have this shift in mindset, but then also feel confident enough to actually try to put something into practice?
Right. So I don't remember exactly, but I don't think the course itself took me more than like a week. And it didn't really feel like a binge. I mean, I had a lot of like swimming and sunbathing to get to, so I didn't have that much time to devote to it. But yeah, I think a couple of hours a day for about a week was what it took to get through the course. And then like for the next 2 weeks or something, I was doing like a 2 or 3 hour chunk every 2 or 3 days to
Got it.
plan to sort of like put it into effect.
And now let's talk time of actually doing this work. So you're like, okay, I'm doing this thing. I think one of the challenges that a lot of educators have when as soon as we change anything, right? We know our traditional structure, we know like what a unit looks like and sounds like. You even highlighted it's like there's some day that we spend on like a quote unquote quiz or formative assessment. Then there's like review days near the end.
Like
By
fitting it all in, like all this curriculum you have to get in there.
Yeah, like when you go to these more regular assessments, like John and I typically would do like a one day a week, what we would call is like our assessment or a growth day, as well as the other half would typically be used for students to continue trying to build their proficiency in different past
Hmm.
concepts, to get reassessed, things like that. How did you feel about being able to quote unquote cover the content? Did you feel that you were more pressed for time? Did you feel like you actually had more time, or you got more accomplished through this work? How did that look and sound in your world?
So with the combination of that idea from PLCs of essential skills, for us that was key. Like sitting down and looking at it as a semester and looking at all the standards that we're supposed to cover and thinking about what's essential. What do these kids need for their next math class? What is the most important thing that we teach? And picking those out and say, we don't want
Mm-hmm.
students to leave without this. That was super important. And then if you concentrate on that and um, do these smaller chunks, what it ended up with us was 4 units broke down into 9 essential skills. So 2 or 3 per unit. Um, and it ended up being more time to teach,
I love it.
more time to
Mm-hmm.
focus on
Mm-hmm.
things because we
Totally.
weren't wasting our time with the non-essential skills. Like there's a lot of stuff in the standards that we get caught up on that is not essential
You
if you
almost
look
like
at it.
commit like an equal amount of time to
Yeah,
Yeah.
everything instead of going, wait a second, this thing I only need to, we need to expose students to, we need to explore, but it's actually not something that's going to be fundamental to the next part of the journey. But over here, this thing, if they don't have this skill, this is going to really cause them a challenge next year, 2 years from now, whatever it might be. And I
exactly.
think that is such a huge, almost like, career changing moment when you get to that
Yeah.
place. Now, it's still, and I'm sure you'd agree, like there is a lot of thinking to be done. And again, with your team, it makes it way easier when you all get to sort of, you know, discuss and say, well, like how much time should we spend, or is this something we really need to focus on? But when you do it as a team, then you can at least feel more confident that, hey, like I think there's some merit here to what we're trying to do versus just trying to be, we'll call it equal, right, to all the standards. It's like equal, well, it's not really about equality, it's about what matters, what really matters, what is essential. So I love that. And really, you're kind of teasing out this idea that when you're exploring standards based grading, that's essentially the work that's happening, because then you start to
Hmm.
look at things and go, wait a second, like we're not actually necessarily assigning a grade for every standard, but we're starting to think like, what is it in general that we're actually assessing here and evaluating here? And which ones of these am I more concerned about ensuring that those students do come back to, right? So I'm going to make them revisit them. Some of these other ones over here, I might go, we're not quite there, but I'm not that concerned about it. I'm really concerned over here. I'm just really hyper focusing. And then I'm what I'm hearing from you, and maybe you can confirm or deny this, but when you focus on those essential skills, sometimes some of the other, like the secondary skills, or maybe we'll call them the not so important or not so essential skills, actually start to develop as well, almost like in unison, because it was like maybe they were being held back because of the challenge in these more important pieces of the puzzle.
Well, yeah, and sometimes those sort of secondary standards are really great ways to teach the essential standards, you know?
Yeah. Like
If
excuses, right?
like
Excuses
I
to
don't know,
dig in more.
trigonometry, there's one about the complementary angle relationship of trigonometry. It's not an essential standard, but it's something that's really interesting to talk about and see if students can really reason their way through with the essential standards of knowing like that it's ratios of the opposite side to the hypotenuse, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, those turned less into, oh man, we got to spend a whole day figuring out the Cavalieri principle to, oh, let's explore the Cavalieri principle using these formulas and because the formulas are the essential standard and the this principle is something that is a really bigger understanding that we can get into that is
Mm-hmm.
super hard to assess by the way anyway like
Yeah.
so um yeah, totally, it gave us a different perspective on things. It
Yeah.
also it like the whole idea of tying in delta math and that idea that it was a great way to do this reassessment thing um was so that we could get the assessment of skills out of the way and really focus on problem solving and
Mm.
communicating. And like that's what I talked about a lot in our last session here. And it's something that's a struggle for me the whole time. Like, and so all of those changes around the skills were sort of easy um, once we figured out what to do, and we set up the delta math into chunks where we could assess them in 20 minutes or less, and that's where those nine chunks came from that it turned into. But then the other change that is a really big um, change in the way I am approaching the bigger skills that I want students to walk away with um, is we broke down problem solving and reasoning themselves into their own learning targets, like specific to them. And we tried to make it into four things that you have to do when you are problem solving. You have to show us that you can do. And what that did is it changed it from the mindset I had about, I don't know, like let me take a beat and say like that our grading system is such that it's about a third of a grade is skills, a third of the grade is problem solving, and a third of the grade is reasoning. And so it's a big deal. These are a big deal. We've given them a lot of weight, and we've given them a lot of weight without like really understanding what to do with them. So
Mm-hmm.
what we did is we said, if we're assessing problem solving, we need to assess problem solving. It's not a like the way I used to think about it was a lens through which we assess content.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not on that page anymore. It's they're a set of skills in themselves. And so
Absolutely.
we looked at like the math practice standards and we looked at like the ancient research from Polya or whatever. And there are four things you have to do to solve a problem. You
Right.
have to know what the problem is. You have to come up with a strategy. You have to apply the strategy and you have to reflect on it. Boom. There's our four learning targets. for problem solving and reasoning. And those are all we're assessing when we're doing problem solving and reasoning. We're not assessing content.
Hmm.
There's different content that we're going to throw in, and it's going to be the content that we cover in the class, but we're not assessing that content here. We're assessing problem solving.
Do, do you
So
find that at any time you're doing both, you're saying, hey, we're assessing, both the content that you're showing through the problem solving, but we're also going to assess and give you feedback on your problem solving approach.
there's a little bit of that. So for the third of the grade that is the we call it concepts and procedures, the skills. Um, you can get to a B in that, basically the proficient level, by doing all the Delta Math stuff proficiently. We
Got it.
give like the Delta Math tests on the
Hmm.
growth days. Um, so that was a big hurdle for students to get over, because 100% on these little tests is a B.
Hmm.
Okay.
Right,
Um,
right, right, right,
for the A, you have to perform and apply those skills in problem solving and reasoning prompts.
right.
And so every third or fourth growth day, we made into we called it a cumulative check-in. This is the summative assessment. And that was really nice too, because we made, instead of doing these unit tests, to do 4 unit tests in a semester, we have 3 cumulative assessments. And those were strictly problem solving and reasoning prompts. So there are bigger questions where they have to do these problem solving and communication learning targets. And the A in the concepts grade came from your performance on those. So if you're 100% in the Delta Math, you're at a B. If you can apply those skills in a unfamiliar situation, and if you can reason about those skills, that's an A. So yeah,
Got it.
we're
Yeah.
slightly
You're
assessing, but
right.
that's the whole idea, that those it's hard to get past. You can't solve a problem that relies on some skills without knowing the skills first, right? So if you're solving a problem where you're finding an angle, you have to know how to use trigonometry. It's just
Mhm.
you're unable to do it without that. And that was the problem with how we were assessing before. Um, like the skills weren't there, so we couldn't even look at problem solving really, because they weren't able to approach a problem.
Right.
Now, even if students aren't like super solid on the skills, um, they have some preliminary steps that they can show that they have problem solving skills. Like anybody can restate a problem, you know?
Mhm,
Tell us
mhm.
what they're actually asking you to do. It's reading comprehension. It's barely even math, but it's a super important step that we gloss over. How many times do students answer the wrong problem when we ask them?
Mm.
Um, and so there's step one. And if you get that, you're already passing problem solving. All you have to do is restate the problem, you know? Um, then, if you can describe in words a strategy that you would use to solve the problem, well, that's the next step, you know? If you do that, you're at a C or whatever.
Mm.
Um, and then proficiency requires you to actually solve the problem and get the right answer, but um, there's a low entry point and an authentic, like, important entry point. It's not hard, but it's necessary. And we found like that sort of first level step into problem solving was really useful. And we found that was really useful in the communication piece as well. And so, what all of that, man, these grading schemes get so complicated when we have to put numbers on stuff. But like through all of that, what it meant was that, yeah, now if we can get all of our students to do these skills, then we've solved that problem of um, students leaving without us feeling like they know how to do anything. Like we have like direct evidence that they have.
I love it.
And we have direct evidence that most of them have worked to do so. Like most students needed 2 or 3 or even more tries to get it right on these skills assessments. but they did
Yeah.
because they knew that it had a direct effect on their grade. We know that grades are a motivator for students, so we said, okay, we get this. Let's do this in a way that it will inspire them to do something worthwhile. Um, so yeah, I'm going all over
I,
the place here, but it all sort of worked together
well,
to make
I
us feel a lot better about things.
Yeah, and you know what you just articulated is something that we speak with a lot of the, the district leaders that we work with or school leaders that we work with as they try to make change in their math programming. And that's really that you had a clear objective. So one specific objective you had and your team had was, how do we ensure that students have those essential skills when they leave? And really, whether you realize it or recognize it, and I know you're recognizing it now, is that you also had a key result. So you're actually using a tool and you're able to leverage that specific tool to help you with your monitoring to determine, like, is this working? Like, is this doing what we wanted? And the answer I'm hearing from you, and I'd like to dig in a little deeper here too to see what other sort of changes have seen in either the data or even just some of your anecdotal evidence around student outcomes. But it sounds like that one in particular, you identified a tool that could do that part well. And I think that's such an important piece. Like, as an educator, we often think that we have to have our hands in everything at all times. And in reality, what you did is you actually opened the door for you to help address another challenge, which was around this idea of problem solving and reasoning that you were sharing, that you felt you weren't doing well either. So even though you started with essential skills, that actually was the stepping stone to help you better assess and I'm going to argue that by assessing problem solving and reasoning and application better, what you're actually doing is helping students to become better in that area. Because if we don't assess that area well, then students aren't going to actually rise to the challenge and actually learn those things, right? They're going to just try to figure out where you hold in the hoop, and they're going to try to jump through that hoop. So by getting your assessment game, addressed in that area, you're now sort of going, no, this is what we're trying to get you to do. Let's do that. And students are now aiming for that goal instead. So you've kind of hit, two what you would call is like very different areas, but one, it sounds like sort of led you towards opening the door to be able to do some great things over here. What, like, are there any other either data pieces or any other sort of student outcome pieces that you would say were, sort of big? I think the ones you've shared already are massive, but are there any other pieces or outcomes that you've noticed that has really that you've noticed have changed since making some of these changes in your classroom?
Yeah, there's lots. The other thing, another big thing that we took away from, or that I took away from your course was the idea of portfolios. I wish, I think you've talked about that website that went away. And
Yes.
Yes,
you still
yeah.
had some
Fresh grade.
screenshots of that website.
I
I was like,
did.
oh man, I want to
Yeah.
get that. But
Yeah.
we ended up using just Google Slides and a template where
That's
students could
the lesson that
reflect.
we included in the course.
Yeah, and it's and that's something that we haven't figured out how to use right yet, but we like it. All of our kids, we got to a point where all of our kids are using it for some purpose, and and we just have to make it a little more clear what that purpose is and how we use it. We can't spend a lot of time, of course, like looking at the reflection that students have, but we want to make sure that it's being helpful and helping them move forward. So adding the reflection piece was, it feels really good too. It feels like this is something we should be doing. That's what a lot of this is like, yeah, this is the right thing to do. We should be thinking about what we're doing so that we can get better. And some students really took that and used it well. And we want to look at those students and like use them as examples, probably
Hmm.
moving on. Second thing is the giving the thing that these little chunks of skills on Delta Math were able for us to do was give students who never see success in math class a place to see success in math class.
Love
These
it.
are skills that we specifically put together as things that everybody can do. There are no can't do students in our classrooms. We just don't have them. There are some won't do students. And if we if we change our mindset, which is part of the PLC thing, to we're not going to accept that, and you have to do this to get through this class, um, and we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that you do this, then those won't do's go away, and you're left with students who just do it. Um, of course, that's the dream. There's still some students who are going to be resistant and just decide not to do stuff, but
Mhm.
we can give them opportunities in different spaces in the school to do that. We can figure out strategies for that. But anyway, we have the kids who are trying, and before they'd come to a test and they'd try and their try wouldn't be good enough yet, and then that's gone. They never get to see it again. And so their whole life is just this, I wasn't ready for that yet. And that's what
Hmm.
math class
Yeah.
is.
Mm.
Yeah, it's and I love that you've kind of grabbed, the essence of the course, which is called assessment for growth, that whole growth by the horns. Like you've grabbed that by saying we're going to value and reward growth, and we're going to set up a system that does that in spite of all the systems that never have rewarded growth in the past. And it sounds like you've got a lot of success happening with your students. You've made a lot of leaps this year with your team, with what structures you're putting into place. I'm loving hearing all of this. I'm wondering, John, what would you say right now is your next step in your process? Like you've set up a great system. Yeah, it sounds like it's working. I'm sure you're going to continue this next school year as well. But what would be your next step, next area of focus?
So the next area, well, just to wrap up the um, Kyle's question, like the data also really supported what we did. The
Right.
Doing something in the middle of the year isn't a great idea, but it gives you good data. It gives you data where you can relate a kid before you did it to the same kid after you did it.
Very
Um,
true. Very
so
true.
we recently had there's been like a lot of um, the resistance actually to this approach has mostly gone like over our head, and they go directly to the principal or they go directly to the guidance counselors. And so we've had to do so much communication with that sphere of people, and this indirect responding to issues has been super stressful. So we called all of the counselors and the admin together and the whole math department for a reflection meeting just this week about the geometry thing, because we want others to maybe sort of pick some of this stuff up too and try it
Mm-hmm.
themselves. Um, and we want to bring the counselors and the admin in on this. So, and we presented them with the data, and the data clearly shows that not only did this not hurt anybody, this made everything better. Like
Mm.
all on average, uh, every score, every way you look at averages, it's higher. And in fact, when we look at the year before, and previous years as well, there's a slump in the second semester usually for us. And that slump is not only gone, it's the other way.
I love it.
Everybody got better. So the same students on average got better, and compared to last year, way better for second semester than it was before. So we have
That
some
is
pretty good
awesome.
data. Yeah.
That
Uh,
that is so awesome to hear. And I want to, kind of reiterate this idea of assessment for growth. Like the name of the course is assessment for growth, because that's exactly what we're trying to perpetuate. And when you really think about it, it makes sense because we are coming back. And I love how you articulated that about how, for some students, like their life in math classes, I just wasn't ready yet. And the reality is usually they don't even look at themselves that way. They don't even recognize that. They just think I'm not good enough for math,
Mm.
or I'm just not able to do the math. And in reality, it's exactly what you said. The reality is they just weren't ready yet. And this structure and this model, and it can look and sound so many different ways. Like the way you and your team have set this up is pretty unique in terms of how maybe I might set mine up, or John might, or some others that we've chatted with. But that's the beauty of it. It's like you're taking the fundamental ideas and you're trying to make it work for your context and your course in particular, and you're actually seeing growth, which I think is just fantastic. So, as we're wrapping up here, I'm wondering if you had one, I guess I hate the word advice, but if you had one suggestion, one thought for those who are listening and going, I like how this sounds. Like I like what John shared here today. It sounds like it's working for John. What would you say to them in order to help them, take that first step, to actually start heading in this direction? Because I'm sure it's scary. I remember being scared. You're worried about, pushback. You're worried about, is it going to work right? Am I going to do it right? What would be your sort of final thoughts for them to take in order to try to help them take that first step in that direction?
That's a great question. But I also want to bounce back to John's question of the one thing
Yeah,
I'm working on. Sorry, I keep doing this
that's all right.
ping pong thing. There is like the one thing I'm still working on is non-traditional assessment evidence and individualized assessment evidence. I can't see that going over very well in my current environment, and I have to like really think about how to get that in, like interviews and stuff. I
Mm,
Observations,
Observations,
conversations,
yeah, exactly.
working that in.
That's something that is so important to our understanding of students. But
Totally.
in a, I'll go ahead and say it, a slightly litigious environment, I have to be really careful about using thing about being fair, you know. So and that's a whole another hurdle that I'm not ready to start jumping over yet.
Hmm.
But then,
as long
um,
as that's on your mind, though, you know what I mean. You
yeah,
will you will find a way to be able to,
right,
develop a way that can work
A
and
system.
still,
Yep.
fit for sure.
yeah. And it does. It informs my understanding. So, if there's a big discrepancy between the numbers on the page and my understanding of a student's abilities, I'm going to bring those two things together somehow. Um, that's professional judgment. That's who,
Right.
like, that's
Exactly.
why I spent so many years learning to be a math teacher. Um, Now back to if anybody's working on getting started on this or something like this, uh, maybe three things. One, do the essential skills thing. Like, look really closely at the stuff you're supposed to cover. Think about what you need for the next classes or in life and focus on those things. It's less than you would think. Number two, think about whether the daunting thing when it comes to like the idea of reassessment for me and for most of the teachers I talk to is I don't want to have to make another test.
Yeah.
Like it's so time consuming to put together. Think about it though. Do we need to assess skills anymore? Do we need to write an assessment for skills? That's a big chunk of what you assess.
Hmm.
Probably for a lot of traditional tests, it's all that's on there. Um, and
Yeah.
we have technology that does it better than we do and that has more variety than we do. So it's not that big a deal. It's super easy. Delta Math does it with a click of a button. I mean, use it. If you're assessing skills and you are writing down test questions that are skills based. Stop.
I like that. Yeah, that's good. Just
Like,
stop it.
save yourself hours and hours every week and do it on Delta Math because that's what it's for. If you want to build up skills, there's no better way to do it, in my opinion. And number three, make sure you have some allies. Like, make sure you have a team that you can get on board. If you can't find anyone in your school, hook up with someone online because, like, this is not, it's not easy. And if you try to do it yourself, oof, good
Right,
luck.
totally, and those are three great next steps for folks to kind of get started and think about how to shift some of their practices around, standards-based grading with those three kind of starters. So I want to thank you for providing that, John, and hey, thanks for being here, and thanks for kind of sticking with us and coming back a year later. I think a lot of folks have pulled a lot of great nuggets from this episode on standards-based grading. And you're right. I think when you mentioned Anna Clark's episode, which is episode 201, which was also on standards-based grading, we got a whack, folks. If you ever kind of search Make Math Moments and put standards-based grading in there, you're gonna get,
or even just assessment. There's so
you're gonna get
many
lots of
assessment
stuff in there to kind of keep you going on this, and this is going to be one more that gets added to that list. So John, I want to thank you for that, and I'm super excited for the future of your students and the work that you are doing over there in Qatar. So thanks again for joining us today.
Well, thank you guys, and thank you for putting together that course. Like, there are some key moments in my professional career, and this is definitely one of them. And that course was the sort of brought a whole lot of things together for me and made so much sense and really, really changed the way I do things. So I really appreciate that it was there.
Thanks for saying that. Thanks for saying that.
That means a ton to us, and it obviously makes all of that time and effort so worthwhile when we're hearing friends like you feeling that they're benefiting like you have. So that is awesome. Friends who are listening, we will put all the links in the show notes. That assessment for growth course, actually, if you're interested, you can go to makemathmoments.com/AFG for assessment for growth, AFG. And, or you can just Google it, Make Math Moments, assessment for growth. You'll be able to check that out. And my friend, John, once again, thanks so much. You're doing awesome work. Say hello to your allies. It sounds like you've got a nice group going over there. And you know what? Clearly, you're making some awesome waves in math in your area. So keep it up. And hey, if next time we're in Qatar, we're going to come and look you up, my friend.
Right on. That sounds great.
All right, my friend. Take care. Thanks a ton.
Take care.
And don't be a stranger.
Thanks so much.
Hey, when we chatted with John, we chatted about a few different things, mostly on his journey on the assessment practices that he's changed and morphed and put into place. And in part of that, you heard him talk about kind of in his actual recommendations to you to get started was thinking about these essential skills. And Kyle actually articulated a couple of things around that by thinking about these objectives. Like his team had a clear objective to change this one piece of their math class, and then they set off on setting up actually some key results to hit, which were kind of making sure that they set these essential skills. They started to monitor the impact that they've put into place on those essential skills and the assessment practices in place. So Kyle, I think John did a great job at expressing how his leadership, the trunk of the tree, setting that vision, setting those objectives, making those very clear to the team. I think that being a strong part of the trunk of our trees, this leadership and vision setting, the backbone of a tree is they did a great job at that, and I think they're on their way to kind of rounding out some of the other areas of the tree. What was another specific part of the tree, Kyle, you think John articulated well here today?
Yeah, and like you're saying, that trunk has to be strong in order to support other aspects or other parts of the tree. And the part of the tree I want to talk about, not that there aren't other places we can go, but I'm picturing the limbs of the tree. And the limbs, typically from a classroom perspective, we talk about our professional learning structure for ourselves, or our professional learning plan for educators. Without that team taking the time, the effort to actually engage in that professional learning. So for John, he dove into our assessment for growth course, and he really dove in to try to figure out, how can I change and shift my assessment practices, which of course, through doing so, will implement other aspects of the tree, including his pedagogical content knowledge, where we'd probably nestle in some of the aspects of the assessment process that he's using. So, right with you there, it sounds like the leadership, the vision setting, the pillars in their classrooms are really strong. And again, they had strong limbs, those professional learning structures in place in order to do the necessary work to help them get from A to B, or A to Z in their particular case, as they're trying to shift practice in the classroom. So my wonder for you, friends, is what section of the tree are you thinking about? Where do you see your tree is flourishing? And where do you see maybe aspects of the tree maybe being hindered a little bit, not receiving as much nourishment as it could use? If you're interested in finding out a little more, digging a little deeper, and maybe receiving a little bit of feedback on that, for our district leaders, you can head to makemathmoments.com/grow. And over on that page, you'll be given the opportunity to take a short assessment screener, which is going to help you as a district or organizational leader in identifying areas that your tree is strong for the entire organization, or some areas that might need your attention. And you'll receive a report with some next steps. If you're a classroom teacher, just like John, you can head over to makemathmoments.com/report, and you'll have your classroom-focused math program assessment screener, which will ask some questions that relate directly to your own program in your own classroom. And just like for our district leaders, you're going to receive a customized report as well. So head over to makemathmoments.com/grow or /report, and you can engage in that assessment and dig into some learning for you and your team.
Hey, if this was an episode that you took a lot of value from, and maybe it's not the first episode you've listened to from us before, and why haven't you hit subscribe yet? Like, hit that button, subscribe, so that you can get other episodes right to your device. And if this was the first episode that you've heard from us, welcome. We are glad that you stayed right to the end, and also are here with us right now. And if you have not yet hit subscribe, do that, please. Also, if we could ask one small favor, please share this podcast with a colleague, a friend. Share it in the way that you found it. Did you find it by just going onto your podcast platform and tell them where to find it? Did you find it on the internet? Send them the link. If someone passed it to you by email or talking about it at the lunch table, do the same thing. Share the podcast so that we can reach a far and wide audience, so that we can grow the classroom trees of many educators and help as many students as we can. We've got a goal here, Kyle. I don't think we've ever shared this goal, but our goal is to help 1 million students, but through helping teachers reach those students. 1 million. Wow. We're going to do it. We're going to do that.
And we can't do it without the support of friends like you Math Moment Makers. So help us with that goal. Of course, if you're interested in finding some of the links, the resources, some of the pieces that were shared here specifically on this episode, head on over to makemathmoments.com/episode 236. That is makemathmoments.com/episode 236. And my friends, it's nothing but a pleasure. So until next time, I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr.
High fives for us.
And you know what's coming. A high five for you.